In Norway, on the west coast, near the city of Bergen, there is a mountainous and impassable valley called Isdalen. It's an area of natural beauty not far from the sea, where the foothills meet the north side of the Bergen mountain. Locals have for centuries also given the valley the more ominous nickname, Death Valley, due to the many documented suicides in the region, which go as far back as the Middle Ages. And in more recent times, it has also been home to reported hiking accidents. One morning, around the end of November in the year 1970, a man is out for a stroll in the rugged terrain with his two young daughters. While they enjoy the fresh air, they likely have little idea that they're about to make a discovery which will propel the valley to international infamy for years to come. As they make their way down the path, they suddenly find themselves among the charred remains of a woman located among some scree. It's a macabre scene. The female corpse is lying on her back, but she's turned in such a way that her head is pointing down in the direction of the bottom of the valley. The woman is mostly undressed, but her body is so badly burned that she is more or less unrecognizable. The father and his children quickly race to alert the authorities. But as the investigation eventually concludes, the cops rule it a likely suicide. However, the mysterious nature of the crime scene would encourage massive speculation over the next couple of decades, and today it remains one of the most profound cold cases in Norway. To this day, you see, the mystery remains. Who was this person who would eventually be known as the Isdal woman? And what led to her horrific death on this unforgiving mountain outside Bergen? If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to my channel, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. I'm truly grateful for all the people that have chosen to subscribe so far. Let's get on with today's story. The cops in Bergen quickly respond to the discovery, and immediately they launch a full-scale investigation. When they examine the crime scene, they quickly take note of the woman's supine position. They also note that her hands seem to be clenched by her torso, and there are indications that a campfire has been lit nearby. The front of her body has been severely burned, so if anyone on the scene that day may have crossed paths with her prior to her demise, it wouldn't have mattered much, as her charred facial features renders her unidentifiable. Near the body, and also damaged by fire, are an empty bottle of St. Helvad liqueur, 2 plastic water bottles, a plastic passport holder, a pair of rubber boots, a woolen sweater, a scarf, some nylon stockings, an umbrella, a purse, and a matchbox. There are also a watch, 2 earrings, and a ring. Interestingly, around the body there are traces of burned paper, and beneath the corpse there is a fur hat which is later determined to have been doused in gasoline. This, of course, gives the investigators the immediate suspicion that the fire which has ravaged the bodily remains may have begun as a harmless campfire before it has intensified and gotten out of control after it was intentionally fueled either by herself or a perpetrator. The case soon takes an unexpected turn as forensics experts start to further analyze the objects recovered from the site. It appears that all identifying marks and labels on these items have been removed or rubbed off. Clearly, the only reason to do this would be if either the woman herself or her possible killer wished to hide her identity. And strikingly, this is also known tradecraft implemented by individuals who work in intelligence. Remember, this is in 1970. The Cold War is raging, and Norway literally borders the Soviet Union, so it's not hard to imagine why people would soon start to generate such conclusions from the odd discovery. An autopsy of the body concludes that the woman has died from a combination of being incapacitated by phenobarbital, which is these days sold under the name luminol, and poisoning by carbon monoxide. Soot is found in her lungs, which indicates that she was alive when she was burned, and her neck also appears to be bruised, possibly from a fall or a blow. When her blood sample and stomach contents are analyzed, it's determined that she has ingested between 50 and 70 sleeping pills of the brand Phenomol, and next to her body, the cops also find 12 additional pills. During her autopsy, the coroner finds the woman's dental work so unique and distinct that it's decided to remove her teeth and jaw for further examination, and there are also taken tissue samples of her organs. 3 days after the discovery of the body, investigators find a pair of suitcases which have been abandoned at the Bergen railway station, and they are determined to have belonged to the unidentified woman. Inside the lining of one of the bags, the cops discover some cash, both German and Norwegian. The suitcases also contain some clothing, shoes, wigs, makeup, an eczema cream, Belgian, British, and Swiss coins, maps, timetables, a pair of non-prescription glasses, a pair of sunglasses, some cosmetics, and a notepad. The sunglasses have a partial fingerprint on them, and when it's matched against the prints from the deceased woman, it's determined for sure that the suitcases had indeed been hers. But just like with the clothing the woman wore prior to her death, all identifying marks on the items in the suitcases have been removed. The authorities are baffled, and they are unsure of how to proceed with the case, so they launch a public appeal for information in the Norwegian media regarding the story. It's established that the last time she was seen alive was on November 23rd, nearly a week before the discovery of her remains, when she checked out of room 407 of the hotel Horteheimen. Staff at the hotel told the authorities that she had been good-looking and roughly 5'4" tall, with dark hair and small brown eyes. Several people noted that she had kept mainly to herself in her room, but interestingly, she had seemed like she was on guard. When she had indeed checked out, she paid her bill in cash and asked for a taxi to be called, and her whereabouts from when she departed the hotel that day until her charred body is found 6 days later remain uncertain. The notepad uncovered among her belongings is found to contain a number of entries that the cops are eventually able to decode as dates and places the woman had visited. Based on these handwritten forms, it appears as if the woman had traveled around Norway, including the cities of Oslo, Trondheim, and Stavanger, but also made trips around Europe, including Paris. She's done so using at least 8 fake passports and aliases. While details such as birthdays and occupations change from one check-in form to the other, she consistently gave her nationality as Belgian, and the forms were all filled out in either German or French. These were her false identities. Geneviève Langer, born in Leuven and residing at Rue Saint-Walburg No. 2 in Leuven. Claudia Thield, born in Brussels and residing at Place Saint-Walburg 17 in Brussels. Also Claudia Thield, born in Brussels but residing at Rue de la Madeleine No. 3 in Brussels. Claudia Nielsen, born in Ghent and residing at Rue Saint-Walburg 18 in Brussels. Alexia San-Merciès, born in Ljubljana in Slovenia, residing at Rue Saint-Hildegard No. 81 in Brussels. Vera Jarl, born in Antwerp. Fenella Locke, whose address details have been lost. And finally, Elisabeth Leenhoeven, born in Oostend and residing at Philipsstokstraat 44A in Brussels. Now, with the exception of Rue de la Madeleine, not only all of the names, but also the street addresses turned out to not exist. The cops learned the woman previously stayed at several hotels in Bergen, and she had on multiple occasions changed rooms after checking in. She had told several hotel staff members that she was a traveling saleswoman and antiques dealer. One witness claimed to have heard the woman talking to a man in German in one of the hotels, while others that met her mentioned that she also spoke Flemish and broken English, seemingly wore wigs, and she would also smell strongly of garlic. I'm not sure why that last bit of information is relevant and what the meaning of it is, but these are all the facts that have been reported. Composite sketches of the mysterious woman are produced based on these witness descriptions, and they are soon circulated internationally via Interpol. Even though the cops deploy a large amount of resources in order to find some answers, the woman, however, is never identified, and the case was rather quickly closed because the authorities virtually had no leads to pursue. The cause of death was listed as suicide by ingestion of sleeping pills, but the story still had so many unsolved questions that many believed she had indeed been murdered. After all, the explanation of a suicide didn't clarify why her body had been so horribly burned, even prior to her dying. Finally, on February 5th, 1971, the woman is given a Catholic burial in Bergen, A guess was made that she had indeed been Catholic because she had used the names of a number of different saints in her various check-in forms when noting her fake addresses. She is placed in an unmarked grave within the Møllendal graveyard, and her funeral was attended by 16 members of the Bergen police force, as no relatives or friends had obviously been located. The decision was made to bury her in a zinc coffin. This would preserve her remains more effectively, and it would also allow for an easier disinterment, should the authorities ever decide to take another look at her body. Her funeral was photographed extensively in case any relatives ever decided to make themselves known, and these are some of the pictures that remain. The reasons behind the woman's many identities and her extensive travel plans seem to have raised the most questions in the time after the discovery of her remains. And it didn't take long before people started to suspect she had been involved in either espionage or some sort of criminal activity. Again, the Cold War context of the period heavily affected how people perceived unexplained incidents around this time. And Norway actually experienced other strange disappearances in the 1960s, notably close to military installations. Many of these disappearances were indeed tracked to international espionage. The records of the Norwegian armed forces, which were later declassified, later revealed that many of the woman's movements seemed to correspond to top-secret trials of the Penguin missile, an anti-ship weapon designated AGM-119 by the US military, which was developed by a Norwegian arms manufacturer in the 1960s. A local fisherman reportedly saw the woman near the area surrounding the city of Stavanger, where the military would test these missiles. And her actual presence in Stavanger was also corroborated by a shoe salesman who had sold her a pair of rubber boots. Other theories have pointed towards her possibly spying for a non-government group, perhaps one of the left-wing organizations that became notorious in the 1970s, such as the Baader Meinhof group. But to this day, it remains speculation whether the woman found in the Isdal Valley was indeed involved with greater conspiracies. The taxi driver who reportedly picked up the woman from the hotel when she checked out and took her to the Bergen railway station was not identified right away. In 1991, however, a former taxi driver did come forward, claiming to be the person who had given the woman a ride that day, and he interestingly said that they had been joined by another man for the drive to the station. In 2005, a Bergen resident reported to a local newspaper that he suspected the Isdal woman to be a person he had seen 5 days prior to the discovery of the body. He had been out hiking in the area, and later he had recognized her from the police sketch. The man, who had been 26 years old back in 1970, had noticed how the woman had been very lightly dressed, almost as if she was taking a stroll through the city. She had not been wearing the proper attire for an arduous walk across the valley. The woman had been walking ahead of two men who were both wearing coats that looked like something people from Southern Europe would wear. The woman had seemed resigned, and at one point she appeared to try to say something to the man, but then decided against it. Later, he went to an acquaintance at the police station to report the odd encounter, but he had apparently been told to forget about it. Because of this, neither the man's name or his alleged sighting was recorded at the time. In 2016, Norwegian broadcaster NRK commissioned American artist Stephen Missal to create a number of alternative sketches of the Isdal woman, and these sketches were shown to witnesses who had purportedly met her during her stay in Bergen. In 2017, a stable isotope analysis of the woman's teeth, which had been taken from her jawbone, indicated that the person had been born around 1930, plus or minus 4 years. She was likely from around Nuremberg in Germany, but she would have moved to France or the French-German border area as a child, and this reinforced an earlier examination of the woman's handwriting, which had suggested that she had been educated in France or a neighboring country. This analysis also indicated that she had seen a dentist in either East Asia, Central Europe, Southern Europe, or South America. And while this is an extensive list of places, it does add to her mystery. Author Dennis Saka Aske has proposed an explanation to the story that differs a bit from the other conspiracies. He believes that the Isdal woman had been a sex worker. He supports this theory based on the way that her route had been planned. It had been very deliberate, and she had always returned to the same point, which was likely her home. The different men she had been seen meeting with also never came forward, which would make sense if none of them desired to admit they had met with a sex worker. This author, Eske, also argued that another person must have been present at the crime scene when the woman died. And this was based on the evidence from the scene, as well as her medically intoxicated condition in the hours prior to her demise. He believes her death had been a murder or possibly an assisted suicide, but he considers murder to be most likely. A 2019 article in the French newspaper Le Républicain Laurent reiterated the claims by a resident of the French town of Forbach, who insisted that he had been in a relationship with the Isdal woman back in the summer of 1970. According to this person, the woman was a polyglot with a Balkan accent, and she would often dress herself up to look younger than her actual age. She had refused to share her personal details, and she would often receive scheduled phone calls from abroad. The informant had at one point looked through the woman's belongings, and he had found a number of wigs, colorful clothes, and a photograph of the woman riding a horse. He had indeed suspected her to be a spy, and he had considered contacting the authorities, but supposedly he had been too afraid to do so. Now, the photograph of this woman riding a horse was printed together with the article when the newspaper picked up the story. But of course, whether there is any truth to this person's claims is not certain, but it has definitely added another chapter to this odd story. There's been a number of other cases that have seemed strikingly similar to the story of the Isdal woman. One notable example is the Somerton man, an incident which has also been known as the Tamam Shoot case, after this Persian phrase was written on a note found in the man's pants. The body of the Somerton man washed ashore in 1948 on a beach near a suburb of Adelaide in Australia, and he has remained unidentified to this day. Just as in the case of the Isdal woman, there have been speculations over the years that his death had been tied to espionage, but investigators in Australia have had equally few leads to pursue, and we will likely never know the true story behind the murder. Even in Norway, there's been another similar incident that reminds us of the Isdal woman. In 1995, a lady used the alias Jennifer Fairgate when she checked into the Oslo Plaza Hotel, and 70 hours later, she is found dead in her room with a 9mm pistol in her hand. She had a gunshot wound to her head, and authorities ruled her death as suicide. The story sparked speculation across social media, but despite exhaustive investigations, this woman would also remain unidentified, and eventually the case was closed. Whether we will ever find out what truly happened to the Isdal woman, or perhaps more intriguingly, who she really was, is hard to say. But as I am recording this, it's been 55 years since her body was discovered among the scree, and her story remains a mystery. This is it for today's episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I very much hope to make it to 500 subscribers by the end of the summer, and I am so grateful for the people who have chosen to check back in with me whenever I put out a new story. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to give it a like, and I will see you back here in 2 weeks.